Hey, I'm back. Welcome to the second installment of my episode breakdown of the Telepathy Tapes, a groundbreaking, and I'll say that with my full chest, groundbreaking, paradigm shifting podcast that I cannot get enough of, and that's why we're here, because you can't either. Before we begin, if this is your first time seeing my face for some reason, hi, hello. My name is Sundown, and this is Logically Free Spirited, where I talk about all things scientific and spiritual while remaining grounded yet open minded, probably focusing a lot on consciousness. But this, as I mentioned, is part of a series, and today we will be talking about episode 2 of the Telepathy Tapes. So basically what I'm saying is go back and watch my previous videos on the subject to catch up, and I've linked them below and started a playlist. But okay, presuming everyone's still here, watched my last video. If you managed to stay till the very end, which no judgment if you didn't, but I did mistakenly say that we would meet Akil as well as Houston, and I was wrong. We are just meeting Akil today. Houston will be the next episode. I'm almost positive, like not 100%, but like 95%. Also, now that I'm getting the hang of this, I want to clarify exactly what I hope to present in each deep dive. My goal or thought process, at least at the present moment, is to summarize each episode while hopefully leaving enough intrigue for you to want to listen to the podcast if you haven't already. But the goal is also to veer off, going deeper into different aspects mentioned, whether that is the credentials of new doctors introduced, explanations of experiments, my thoughts around controversies or questions I have, or just things I've learned that are relevant but not necessarily included in the podcast. Basically, I want to be a value add as much as possible. And the goal is to raise awareness. So please like and sub and comment and share and all of those things so we can keep pushing this research out, because awareness is the next great step. Anyways, in episode 1, Dr. Powell tells Kai that the experiments they did with Mia wouldn't hold up under scientific rigor. And in episode 2, she explains why. Now, remember, this is a podcast, and when it first came out, you could only hear Kai's description of the experiments. You couldn't actually see the videos that are on the website now. And one thing she doesn't say in that first episode is that at the time of the experiments, in order for Mia to physically type on her iPad or letterboard, Ileana had to be physically touching Mia. And here enters just one of the controversies surrounding this topic: the communication methods used. Supported typing, facilitated communication, rapid prompting method, spelling to communicate. I touched on all of these briefly in my initial video, and all of these forms are slightly different from one another. Facilitated communication was the original, so that's the term I'm going to use to encompass all of it throughout this video. It's a technique that involves someone with a communication impairment, like non-speaking autism, and someone who's referred to as a facilitator, who works with that person by physically supporting them as they point to communication aids like a letterboard or iPad. The physical support needed varies from person to person, but also often evolves within a person as they become more comfortable and proficient with their use. Now, it's important to note that facilitated communication and the like are considered to be controversial. And organizations such as the American Speech Language Hearing Association, otherwise referred to as ASHA, have warned against them on the premise that it's really difficult to replicate the results of facilitated communication in controlled settings, leading to the inference that it's the facilitators, not the non-speaking person, that is either consciously or subconsciously the source of what is being communicated, the text. Critics believe that the facilitators are typing themselves either by controlling where the speller's hand points or moving the letterboard to the speller's finger as opposed to the other way around, or subtly cueing the speller on which letters to point to, or if they're hovering over a letterboard, when to point down. When this happens unconsciously, it's known as the ideomotor reflex, which is essentially when your body responds to your thoughts without conscious effort. That is what the critics think is happening to the facilitators that truly believe in this form of communication. They often cite studies from the 90s, which I've reviewed myself, and I've linked in the description box below for your own research. But again, the overarching premise is that the results aren't replicable under controlled settings. And to me, that's key, right? Controlled settings. Everything has to be just so in order for it to be scientifically acceptable. And while I understand that, if we have learned anything about these kids so far, it's that that's just not the way autism works. You see, many spellers start by getting support on their hand or wrist. And if we stopped right there, I could see why it could be very easy to doubt the validity of this communication method. When doing research for this episode, I watched a lot of videos of facilitated communication. And I will be very honest, when watching someone first learn to do this, it absolutely looks like the facilitator is in control. 100% it does. But that's all it is, looks. And looks can be deceiving. I have no idea what it feels like because I'm not the one doing it. I'm not the one learning, and I'm not the one teaching or facilitating. I'm not holding someone's hand and feeling them guide me from letter to letter. I'm a spectator watching videos on YouTube from 10 years ago. I don't know what it feels like, but I know it can't be easy. Many of the spellers suffer from apraxia, a disorder in which there's a significant brain-body disconnect, meaning they can't control their movements despite knowing, understanding, or wanting and physically being capable of doing the movement they want to make. For example, brushing your teeth. Having the physical ability to hold a toothbrush and add the toothpaste and complete the movements needed to brush your teeth, but your body refuses to cooperate. In many cases, it seems because the person in question doesn't have awareness of or isn't able to sense their body. That's why these people often need physical support or grounding when typing to help them sense their arms and hands so they can accurately point. Essentially explaining that, at least in some cases, this could be not a mental disorder, but a movement disorder. Non-speakers are judged by the behaviors of their body, and intelligence has always been tested by your ability to say, point, or do something to prove your awareness. But those are motor skills. So what happens when it's a motor malfunction? When you know the information, but you can't physically respond in a way that's acceptable? When people try to teach you the alphabet, but not teach you how to move your arm to find it on a letterboard? Anyway, in the episode of the Telepathy Tapes, Kai uses what I believe to be the perfect analogy to put this into perspective. Learning to ride a bike. I learned to ride my bike the same way she did, with my dad firmly holding my bike in one hand and me in the other. And then with time, he was able to hold on to just me, and then just the seat of the bike. And then eventually it was just a hand between my shoulders to support my newfound balance until I was off and riding on my own. And facilitated communication seems to be a lot like that. The speller, again, starts with support on their hand or wrist, but eventually that moves up to their forearm and then their elbow and then their shoulder. And then you get to someone like Mia, who just required the tip of her mother's finger on the center of her forehead. But Mia doesn't even require that anymore. Sorry, that was my chair. But Mia's actually typing completely independently now, but she wasn't then. And that's why Dr. Powell says that the experiments done with her wouldn't be accepted by the scientific community. And that's why we meet our next telepath, Akil. Now, like Mia, Akil was diagnosed with autism as a toddler, and he was introduced to supported typing at 11 years old when starting at his new school. His mom's name is Manisha, and she had never heard of supported typing or anything like it. So she looked it up and found nothing but controversy and was understandably skeptical. After about 2 months of typing at his new school, Manisha decided she had a choice to make. It was time. She had to choose to believe or not to believe. She said one day when typing together at home, she just looked at Akil in the eyes and said, "I trust you." And something clicked. She explained it as presuming competence. She chose to believe that her son was in there and that he was intelligent. And soon after, Akil graduated from that support on his wrist to support on his forearm and then his elbow and then his shoulder until he was also able to type completely independently. Now, Akil uses an app that speaks each letter out loud, but also does predictive text. So when listening to his experiments on the telepathy tapes, you sometimes hear letters and sometimes hear whole words. And Akil is also minimally verbal, and he regularly says yes or no, or echoes what he's typing, or simply says the letters instead of typing, which is just another reason to know that his words are his own. So in the podcast, Kai visits Akil and Manisha in their home in New Jersey without Dr. Powell. Dr. Powell had previously met and studied Akil and his abilities after Manisha reached out to her, expressing that she believed her son to be reading her mind. I believe this was in 2016 or 2017 when Dr. Powell was researching this topic alongside Deepak Chopra. Now, Deepak Chopra is not in the telepathy tapes, but he is a notable figure and a good name to drop. If you don't know him, he is an author, speaker, and alternative medicine advocate, overall a new age guru in a way. Known for blending elements of Eastern spiritual traditions, mainly Ayurveda, with Western concepts surrounding health, wellness, and quantum physics mostly. He focuses on the mind-body connection and the power of consciousness, which, side note, Akil is also really into the mind-body connection, and I am too, so it just has me geeked. But he and Dr. Powell visited Akil, and they recorded a few experiments, and these experiments were on the hard drive that Kai was sent back at the beginning of episode 1. And one of these experiments is on the website, the telepathytapes.com, behind that paywall to support the documentary, all of which I know I previously talked about and is again, of course, linked below. But in the experiment on the website, we can see a very excited Manisha looking at pieces of paper with letters and words and numbers typed on them, and a young Akil sitting at a table in front of her, and he is independently typing what his mother is thinking of or looking at. And Deepak and Dr. Powell are also in the shot. There are several things I want to know about this particular experiment, though. Although Akil is typing independently, there are a lot of things going on that I think would naturally drive skeptics mad, and I feel like it's fair. It's clearly not a hyper-scientific setup. The text is typed on what looks like white computer paper, and while I don't notice being able to see through the paper on the video, who knows what it looks like in person. Also, that's why Manisha is behind Akil, but she's not really. I mean, she's really close, and there's nothing separating him. And she's super fidgety. She's excited. She's grinning from ear to ear, but she does not stop fussing with her hands or encouraging and correcting Akil, both of which are obviously not scientifically acceptable scenarios. And this experiment isn't elaborated on the podcast, but I thought it was important to bring up because I think it shows the growth and progression of Akil's abilities over the years. By the time Akil meets Kai, he's come a long way. I'm not positive, but I think this is around the summer of 2021. And Akil's in college by now, and he wants to study plant medicine, which is also so freaking cool. And I'd love to talk about, and is one of those things that, again, just gives me a little hope. But like I said, Dr. Powell doesn't come along with Kai. It's just her and a camera crew. This meeting is really just for her to meet a telepath that can type independently. So there are experiments, but there's also a lot of anecdotal stories about Akil. Starting with some of the stories. I mentioned earlier that apraxia is a condition that affects many people with autism. They are two distinctly different conditions, but they can co-occur. But it's absolutely not the case for everyone with autism. But it was the case for Akil. Manisha explains that sometime after learning to type, Akil expressed that he wasn't really able to sense or feel his body, apraxia. And once she realized this, she was able to help him gain some awareness by touching and massaging him all over, his hands, his fingers, his shoulders, etc. Akil needed grounding to get back into his body in order to be able to type. And even though he's now typing independently, he still feels most comfortable with a blanket around him. And Manisha notes the frustration that for the most part, schools and workplaces just won't allow this. It reminds me of learning about the history of sign language and Braille. A lot of people don't realize that both of these communication methods were also heavily scrutinized and questioned and discouraged and even banned before being widely accepted. Non-speakers and deaf or hard of hearing people were told that they had to learn to read lips instead. And that's where that's what I think is happening now. These people are being denied the right to do and use what makes them comfortable and capable of communicating in places like school and work. And one thing that Kai recently mentioned on Jesse Michael's YouTube video, I think like 2 weeks ago, is that one thing we can do to help is to contact ASHA and advocate for these people. So I've included a bunch of contact information below. Anyway, Manisha also goes on to explain how she came to believe that Akil was telepathic. She tells a story of coming home one day and Akil, I don't actually know how they got into the topic, but essentially Akil is able to tell Manisha everything she did that day. Everywhere she went, what store she walked into, what she purchased, what she didn't purchase, what she thought about purchasing and changed her mind. I mean, everything. And that was just the start. She tells another story of when Akil's able to tell her the plot line of a movie that she was watching on a completely different floor of the house that he had never seen. Or the time she quizzed him with detailed questions about a book that she was reading in another room that, again, he had never read. She also tells a really sweet story of Akil expressing his frustration that the other kids don't reply when he telepathically tells them hello, and asked his mom if she could teach them to hear him or to read his mind. And I just think that's so heartbreaking, but also so sweet. And I hope that Akil understands now that we're all just waking up. And anyways, let's get into the experiments. So these were conducted over the course of 2 days. And when they started, Akil was actually a little overstimulated by the setup. They ended up going with a much more stripped down variation than they were previously anticipating. And in the end, it ended up just being Akil and his mom alongside Kai and one of her cinematographers, Michael. The rest of the crew hung back. And because Dr. Powell wasn't there and this was more pared down, the first experiment actually starts with Manisha tearing sheets of computer paper into smaller slips so that Kai and the crew can write words on them for Akil to telepathically read in his mother's mind. This time, though, they put a black foam backing against the sheets of paper so that the skeptics could see there's no way for Akil to be able to see through the paper. The first word is onion. It's Michael's, and it's shown to Manisha, and then Akil begins to type immediately, and Michael is absolutely stunned when he is correct. I didn't mention this before, but Michael considers himself to be pretty skeptical. It's part of the reason that Kai has included him on this project. He was one of the crew members that actually tested the mindfold, that crazy blindfold that they used for Mia's experiments. He was skeptical, but he was also open-minded. Anyway, like Mia, Akil was right every time. So they did this test repeatedly, different words from different crew members. Kai's excited and she asks Akil if he can still do this if he's further away from his mom. And he immediately verbalizes yes and then moves to the couch about 15 feet away from where Manisha is still sitting in the dining room. While separated and without saying a word, Manisha begins to write down a word on a piece of paper. And as she's writing, Akil begins to shout the letters that she's writing one after another as quickly as she's writing them down, almost beating her into the punch from 15 feet away. It is so incredible. And this is actually the experiment that erased any doubt in my mind that Manisha's fidgeting and fussing is anything more than mother hen excitement. She's thrilled to be taken seriously, and she wants to make sure that no one doubts her son and what they're experiencing. So it makes sense to me that she's hovering and jumpy. But now it's clear to me that with this experiment, I mean, there is no way that she is doing anything consciously or subconsciously to indicate to Akil what letters she's writing down. He is not even anywhere near her. It's just ridiculous to think that they're lying. Anyway, they go on to do experiments with random word generators and random picture generators. And there's really not much to note with the word generator other than the fact that Akil, again, nails it every time. With the exception of one mistake, which I kind of think may have been a choice. After confirming with his mother that he could get YouTube privileges after participating, Akil immediately corrected his mistake and promptly said the right answer, which, by the way, if you're watching, Akil, hi. But also there was another time which didn't make the cut of the telepathy tapes, but I did mention in my initial video. So although it's not in the podcast, Kai's actually talked about this now in several other interviews. She tells a story of a producer coming on set about halfway through testing one day, and she basically says that this producer is more than a little skeptical, that she's actually pretty negative about the whole scenario and not open-minded in the way Michael is. And sure enough, when that producer walked into the room, Akil just stopped participating completely. I think this is fascinating because when you watch the experiments on the website with Akil, it's very clear that he is fully capable and cognizant. It seems to me like he just doesn't want to fuck with a non-believer. I mean, maybe that's it. Maybe it was just the negative. It was probably just the negativity. I mean, in the next episode, we'll hear some really compelling comparisons to radio waves and this type of interference and how it affects all of us, but we're not there yet. In terms of the random image generator, these experiments are really interesting. The first time they do it, again, we find Manisha and Akil separated in different rooms, but it's a little bit of a cluster in the podcast, which Kai admits to, because understandably, she was trying to get a little bit more of a controlled and monitored situation underway. But it really didn't matter. The second Manisha's eyes connected with the image on the iPad, Akil just started shouting out and telling everyone what she was looking at. It all happens very quickly. And then Akil decides to come into the room with his mom. Once he's settled, they decide to do it again. But this particular experiment is on the website, so you can see it for yourself. But the image that comes up is kind of abstract. At first, no one can really identify what it is. Manisha actually says, "What is this?" out loud before ultimately deciding it doesn't really matter if she knew what it was, because Akil would know. And he typed it out immediately. It was paint. Now, this one really raises some eyebrows. If Manisha doesn't know what she's looking at, if she doesn't have a word for it to quote unquote send Akil, what is he interpreting? As Michael puts it, is he bypassing her brain and her interpretation of the image and just using her eyes to see and decide for himself what it is? This is where Manisha's concept of shared consciousness comes into play, where we start to explore the idea that maybe she's not sending a signal for him to read her mind, but maybe they are tapping into the same consciousness and accessing the same information in a way. They ended up doing dozens of other experiments, some with flashcards, some doing really intense multiplication using 8-digit factors, books, pictures, all sorts of things. The multiplication one is interesting, but I figure the math isn't really necessary, right? I mean, if they do a math problem on a calculator and then they solve for the answer and Manisha is looking at the answer, and that's really just reinforcing that Akil can see the answer through her mind, not that he can do the math necessarily. And Kai's not advocating that he is doing the math, and I'm not saying he can't or he isn't. Despite the answer being in the millions, I honestly imagine he can do anything. I'm just pointing this out because I think that's fair. Also, something else that I have not mentioned in any of my videos yet, despite it coming up in both episodes 1 and 2 of the Telepathy Tapes, is that both Mia and Akil have expressed regularly seeing spirits or ghosts. And I did not avoid bringing this up for any particular reason. I just really couldn't figure out how and where to bring it in. And I just kind of figured if I don't say something now, you guys may think I don't believe this aspect of it or I'm avoiding it. And that's just not the case. I just really don't know what to say. I think because I have believed in spirits for such a long time now that this just kind of seems unsurprising. I mean, my dog sees things that I can't see all the time. I've had personal experiences that have contributed to my belief in this. So Mia and Akil seeing or communicating with people of past just kind of seems par for the course. I mean, if I believe that they are telepathic, I don't really have a hard time believing that they can also see things I can't. I guess I do have one question. And it involves thoughts around reincarnation. And actually, I would love for you guys to share your thoughts and opinions around this because it's still quite new to me. But if reincarnation is real, like I discussed at the end of my last video, who are the spirits that Akil and Mia are seeing? Why aren't they reincarnated? Are they just spirits that are waiting to be reincarnated? Or can one only become a spirit after completing their reincarnation cycle? And if that's the case, then why are there bad or negative spirits? By that logic, they would have to continue the reincarnation to learn their lessons, right? I am sincerely asking. I can't wrap my mind around this one. And like I said, it's new to me, so please let me know what you think. And something else I didn't mention earlier regarding facilitated communication is that there have been a number of crimes and or allegations, false and otherwise, known to have been made throughout its history. But I don't think that that's reason to doubt the communication. We are human and we make mistakes, both unintentionally as well as intentionally, whenever it comes to every single facet of life. There is not an industry that has not had a fucked up criminal experience occur. But one notable case regarding FC involves a facilitator that came forward and falsely accused parents of sexual misconduct and worse, who then turned around and became an anti-facilitated communication advocate, which to me just kind of feels like blame dodging. She essentially is saying, I falsely accused someone of a heinous crime, but it's not my fault. My subconscious did it, so blame the practice, not me. It's really annoying. But I've left links to the articles below, so you can take a look if you care to. But bringing this back to a positive note, I want to share a quote that Kai shares at the end of the episode from Nikola Tesla. The day science begins to study non-physical phenomena, it will make more progress in 1 decade than all of the previous centuries of its existence. And truly, sincerely, with every fiber of my being, I hope that this is true and that we are on the precipice of something great. But with that, I will see you guys next time very soon, hopefully in about 2 weeks, where we will meet Katie in Houston finally. Until then, thank you guys so much for watching. You have no idea how encouraging and how much it means. Please keep commenting and telling me your stories. And I love you guys, and I'll be back really soon, okay? Be cool. Bro, I mean, I can't even record. What the fuck? All right, let's fucking do this. What is this shit?